This week we are focusing on management. We're focusing on one of the first areas of management, and the first skill. It's leading. So it's kind of leading on from what we looked at last week. But in this case, we're more or less obviously focusing on leadership and the different types of leadership that a manager can have. So quickly, in terms of what leading is about, a strong leader must be able to communicate, motivate, set an example, which is more or less lead by example, and delegate staff or tasks to staff. So what are we talking about there? Like any manager, they're obviously in charge of pushing a company towards achieving a certain goal. But to do this, they need to work with the staff. And if you're going to work with staff and you're going to work with people, you need to be very strong at communicating, motivating those people, and obviously setting an example. Because if you see your manager sitting down reading the newspaper all day, you're not going to be too motivated to do any work for them. Final thing there is delegating tasks to staff and obviously getting them to do certain elements of work and not taking on everything yourself, which is a disaster. So leading itself is a management skill that encourages people to work towards a goal. And that's what we're doing when we're leading. We're just basically trying to get people to work towards a certain goal. And what we're looking at here is we're looking at three different ways in which you can do that. Three different, I suppose, you could call it schools of thought. So different personality types, different objectives and how to achieve that goal. These are the three: autocratic, democratic, and laissez faire. Completely different styles of management. Completely different. So there are a number of different leadership styles that managers can use to achieve organizational goals, and these are the most common three. And as I said, they're quite different. So autocratic leadership is generally a style where you are the complete boss. You are the commander. And as you can see, obviously the image is the US military. So you can imagine the the strict policies, and you have to uphold those policies, and you're listening to the people at the top, and everything's coming from the top, and you're basically, as the saying would go, you're a foot soldier. Foot soldier in a work or in school or anything like that is basically you would essentially have to do what you're told. Autocratic leadership is a management style where the manager makes all the decisions and the employee basically put up or shut up, as one might say. So you basically have to just listen to what you're being told to do. What's involved in that? Well, obviously it's complete authoritarian. So from authority, they've complete power and control, as you can imagine. And the easiest thing to think of when you think of autocratic is just military. Decisions are not, you're not consulted at all. You are told that you are going abroad to serve in Lebanon. You are told you're going to be going abroad for 7 months. You are told where your camp is going to be. You're not booking accommodation. You're not cooking, you're not bringing over your own food. Everything is more or less, decision is taken and done for you, and you have very little input. So they do not consult with employees in making decisions. They generally don't, and it's not across the board, but they don't trust the employees to get involved in decisions at the top. And obviously, depending on the type of company, if you have like something like a restaurant owner, there sometimes can be autocratic leadership, which I would say always ends terribly. You just have a control freak who runs a business, and they would generally say it's because they don't trust employees, and they think they're lazy or whatever. Generally, to motivate somebody, it's through punishment and through fear. They use threats and punishment to motivate their employees to work harder. Now, there's obviously some countries and some companies that would, use autocratic leadership and be highly successful. We're not making any friends. So, autocratic leadership advantages: quick decision making, because you don't have to consult with anybody. You can just go and make a decision like that, and it has to be put into place. You give orders to staff to make sure everything is done, and if they're not, they'll obviously be penalized. Deadlines generally aren't missed as often. They work hard, as they're being supervised. They know they're always being watched. So basically, from an employee standpoint, you're completely paranoid and you do everything you're told. The disadvantage of autocratic leadership is the stress. You're making all the decisions at the top. Everything falls on you, and you have to make sure that everybody's pulling their weight, and you're obviously burnout and stress are in bold there. There would be elements of that. Motivation's low because you're obviously just telling people what to do all the time. Nobody's going to be enjoying that too much in most cases, and generally, obviously, the environment is the morale is quite poor. high absenteeism and staff turnover. I actually would know of a few restaurants where people have, part-time job, whatever, friends when we were in college, and they'd work in a restaurant where they were always being told what to do. Everything was do this, do that, and they had absolutely no input into anything. And the staff turnover, the amount of staff that would leave there on a regular basis would be incredibly high, and people just calling in sick last minute because they didn't want to deal with a manager. So there are certain industries where this is a no-go. Obviously, if you're running a prison or something like that, or maybe a military or something, this comes into play a lot more. Industrial action, so employees may feel undervalued because obviously they have no part to play in anything. Just do what you're told. It can damage the relationship between the management and employees, and it may lead to increased industrial action, people going on strike. So I would say for something like hospitality, hotel, restaurant, or anything like that, where sometimes you might see a form of an autocratic leader, I would say generally it can turn out quite bad. But in a lot of other industries, it's probably the only way. If you're dealing especially with anything to do with war or anything like that, it's you have to have everything has to be controlled at the top, otherwise there'll be anarchy. The second one is democratic. So democratic leadership encourages employees to participate in decision making. So even from a government standpoint, a whole communist regime would be under autocratic, that everybody else is equal at the bottom and it's the leader at the top that makes all the decisions. And obviously then in I suppose the westernized society that we would all have now, it'd be democratic, where you elect people into government and those people make decisions, but everybody has their own say. Everybody's a right to vote, and obviously your vote can change who gets into office and then who makes the decisions. And from a business, it's the same thing. So everybody's some way involved in the decision. Features of democratic leadership from an authority standpoint: the democratic managers delegate tasks to employees. However, ultimately, the responsibility is obviously in most cases always with a manager. Democratic leaders include employees when they make decision making. So when they make decisions, so obviously if you wanted to make a big decision and you felt like there was employees that could add knowledge to what you were doing, you would ask them. You would trust your employees a bit more to make decisions. It's basically autocratic, where you've a lot more trust in your employees and you let them get involved. And generally they're more motivated because they feel valued. They feel a part of the system. They feel like they have contributed to decisions. They feel like this is something they wanted and this is something they pushed for and this is what happened. So people are much happier in general, I would say, morale-wise. They feel value when they're delegated tasks and involved in decision making in the business. So advantages and disadvantages: we've increased entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship is the idea of the employees basically making decisions that an entrepreneur would usually make. So employees are willing to come up with ideas to help the business to increase sales or decrease business costs. And we looked at this before. We were looking at business startup ideas that Microsoft, being one of the biggest companies in the world, the Xbox, that they produced was made off the back of the employees deciding that they wanted Microsoft. They were working for Microsoft and they wanted to be involved in a project where they would set up a gaming system because it's obviously something they enjoyed and they felt like Microsoft could do it. So it was entrepreneurship really that got Xbox off the ground for Microsoft. It was the employees getting involved and coming up with decisions. So that's obviously one advantage there. Future promotion: if you were very effective in your role at adding to the management's decisions, you could be trusted more and maybe you would receive future promotion. You can empower employees to develop new skills and knowledge, and generally they can get promoted from a role if they do very well. And obviously this can, if an employee wants to get involved and it does get involved, it can lead to higher levels of motivation, as you generally feel valued, and lead to higher productivity levels among staff. And you can imagine that if you were actually working in Microsoft, one of the world's largest companies, and you decided to tell your manager that, look, we're really interested in making this product, and then your manager says, go ahead, go do it. Your motivation is much higher, your productivity is much higher, because this is an idea that you have helped produce. Disadvantages is there is slower decision making because generally more people need to be consulted. So it slows everything down from a decision making standpoint. The frustrated employees, if their ideas are not incorporated into the business and they potentially see other people's ideas being contributed in, but I don't think that's a massive disadvantage. There's not, there's very few other ways around it. And management resented if their employees reduces their power in the role. They may feel like they may not have as much to offer as a manager. Even from a government standpoint, we're looking at the news now and we're constantly seeing, issues over people flying into Ireland and the fact that the airports are relatively open for people to travel in, and people weren't forced into hotels to quarantine for 14 days because obviously a democratic system. The Irish government had been talks for weeks to basically force mandatory quarantine from people coming from certain countries, but I think it's only coming in today or soon, because obviously Ireland would be a democratic country, like most countries in the world, but in order to make a decision like that, it needs to go through certain protocols. So you can't just make something and enforce it straight away. Whereas obviously if we were in an authoritarian regime, think of generally or North Korea as your extreme example, or something like the Soviet Union prior to Russia, prior to 1989. Decisions were made, and they were made, and they're made on the spot, and everybody else had to comply. So even from a government standpoint, we could see that there are benefits in some cases to being autocratic, and obviously in a lot more cases I would say for being democratic. This is note number 3, not 2. Our final one here is laissez-faire leadership. So laissez-faire leaders, one of the most prominent ones you'd see would be Richard Branson, who owns the Virgin media group and media company, I suppose, along with many more things that Virgin gets up to. So laissez-faire leaders take a hands-off approach to employees and allow them to make decisions. So Richard Branson would be quite well known for being very hands-off and trusting his employees. You might have heard the saying that the customer is always right, but he would be one of the bigger advocates to say the customer is not always right. Generally, your employee kind of tends to know more about what's going on than the customer. And to be fair to him, I can see sometimes where that's coming from. So laissez-faire leaders take a hands-off approach to employees and allow them to make decisions that they believe are in the best interest for the business. So you're trusting your employees to make the decisions, and that they'll make the right decision. Obviously, this is completely different to autocratic. In this case, the employees have a lot of contribution. So they set goals for their employees and allow staff to decide how best to achieve these goals. Google does this a little bit as well. They offer the employees a couple of paid hours during the week for free work, essentially, where the employees can work on whatever they want to work on. And it's led to a lot of innovations. I remember hearing one that there was something that was in Google right now that they were operating, which was based off of an employee coming forward and saying that this would be useful for the company to do. I'll look into it and I'll try to find it for the next day. So from an authority standpoint, all the manager does basically is say, I'd like you to achieve this, and the staff go away and figure out how to do it in a lot of cases. Laissez-faire managers empower the employees to make decisions on behalf of the business. They completely trust their employees. In a lot of the case, there's very little supervision. And obviously the employees then are highly motivated because you really feel like you can make a difference. Motivation is much higher for the employees to work harder. They're delegating work to the employees to improve their skills and knowledge. Generally, your employees become better employees. And for entrepreneurship, obviously, they are highly involved in making decisions. So entrepreneurship, again, is when the employee sets up the task of trying to develop new ideas or concepts like an entrepreneur usually would. And obviously with the employees helping in this regard as well, they can help to reduce business costs and improve sales. There are some disadvantages though. Some employees take advantage of the lack of regular management supervision. You can imagine that if this was in maybe a lower paying job where people could just get in quite easier with lower skills, that in some cases those kind of jobs usually have high supervision, and that in this case, because of the lack of supervision, some people might get away with doing nothing. This can create tension among team members and reduce productivity if you feel like there's some people that are being paid to do nothing. while you are working very hard. Some employees just aren't basically up to the task, and they can make poor decisions that damage the business's reputation. You can imagine if you had a company like Tesco, and if you gave 100 employees the login details to Tesco's Twitter page, you can imagine that some people could probably do a lot of damage to Tesco if they were able to tweet whatever they felt at the time as representation of Tesco. So there's some things where obviously people can make very poor decisions that can damage the business's reputation. And I'll try and find a few examples of that as well, because there definitely is a few, especially with Twitter. And poor industrial relations. So management might blame employees for mistakes for not achieving targets, and obviously that can cause conflict between management and staff. We'll be quickly going over this another time again, but these were our 3 different leadership types. Autocratic, again, you're thinking of your military role. Democratic, generally, obviously, everybody's involved, everybody has a say, but the manager has the final say. And laissez faire is that the manager says, this is what we'd like to achieve, and the employees work towards achieving it. In most cases, sometimes they're completely unsupervised and they're trusted. So these are the 3 different leadership types. Again, this is just the start for management leading. Thanks for listening.